Welcome back, everybody. This is Holden B. Huffman, along with
Kendal Coffee.
And today we are back with Doctor Who, a podcast in space and time. Today we just watched the Unquiet Dead of Series 1, Episode 3. And I'm just going to come right out and say it. Mark Gatiss is my least favorite Doctor Who writer of New Who.
Yeah, there's a couple Gatiss episodes I enjoy, but they're kind of few and far between.
I'm just not a fan of his writing at all. I'm sure he's a great guy, but I'm not a fan of his writing.
And this episode in particular is definitely like a step down from the rest of the season so far.
Oh, definitely. Honestly, I think this might have to be my least favorite episode in this season.
Probably not my least favorite. I mean, there were definitely some enjoyable moments, and I kind of enjoyed the story, but it's definitely sort of a weaker episode as far as this season and Doctor Who in general goes.
Right. I don't know if it's just that I just worked a 7-hour shift and I'm tired, or I felt like I could have gone to sleep during this episode. I'm sorry. I was bored.
Especially the first, probably half hour. There were a lot of really slow moments.
Definitely.
It took a good while for it to really pick up, which, when you have a 45, 50-minute episode, then that's not a lot of,
Right. That's half the episode.
Moments. Yeah.
That's half the episode. And okay, first off, this is the first with a Doctor Who, New Who episode with a cold opening.
So. Yeah. Which I did enjoy the cold opening. I thought it was
the cold opening was
wild.
Good. Yeah, it was it was wild, but also I just felt like the effects in this episode are kind of underwhelming as well.
I enjoyed I did enjoy the ghost designs. The effects kind of left a little bit to be desired, but
that is true. The designs were unique. It was just like a little outline, which was nice, but I just didn't like the execution per se.
Yeah, it definitely had sort of an aged quality to it, which it really showed. I mean, there are some, and Doctor Who is kind of hit and miss for that. There are some of the older effects and things that kind of hold up, but
even in the current episodes.
And I think it's a lot of it, I'm sure, is a budget thing because the BBC famously has not had a big budget for Doctor Who, and these days Doctor Who is their big budget show. But
right.
Even still, that can only go so far. And when New Who was, when it was coming back, then they didn't really have as much money to throw into it as they do now. Exactly. And also, the technology wasn't at the level it is now either.
That's also true.
Although, I mean, I would argue that the capability was there for some really good effects because, I mean, if you look at if you look at a movie like Jurassic Park, which came out, let's see, that came out in '93. When did this season air?
2005.
Okay. I mean, I watch a movie like Jurassic Park, and for the most part, it still holds up pretty well. Obviously, some of the CGI feels a little dated, but I mean, for the most part, it's still it still looks very good. So
right. No, I watched the first Terminator a couple months ago, and the effects still really held up.
I think it really comes down to the skill of the people you have working on it, more so than the technology. Because I've seen movies. Take the Jurassic Park series, for example. The newer movies, the dinosaurs just don't have the same lifelike quality to them that they did in the first few movies.
Right. It's like what we were discussing a couple episodes ago. I don't remember. It was either Rose or I think it was Rose, but about Puppet Yoda versus CGI Yoda.
Yeah.
Like, Puppet Yoda has more life to it. The CGI Yoda, like, it looks good, but it's not the same.
Yeah, but even as far as just like the quality of the CGI, there's something different about the first couple of Jurassic Park movies where there was just more depth to it, you know. And I think it really came down to the skill of the artists working on it. And you know, I think there was maybe something similar going on here because I mean the ghosts had interesting designs, but
right,
you know, obviously the CGI wasn't quite there, and I think that probably came more down to budget than anything. You know, I think if they had like maybe more time to polish them up, but you know, time is money in this kind of thing. So like, you know, I feel like they were like almost there, but not quite. They were not quite to a really convincing level.
Right. This episode also had a lot of first time moments. Like, in a way, this is kind of the first Christmas special, but again, it's not.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that it was a Christmas episode, or like an episode that took place on Christmas Eve, but was not a Christmas special. I thought that was really interesting, and you don't see that a lot with movies or TV. You have like occasionally you'll have a movie where like Christmas will pass, but it's not a Christmas movie. But
I can honestly think of quite a few. The Harry Potter series to begin with.
Yeah, for sure.
Batman Returns, and even Iron Man 3. Like that. Yeah. Iron Man 3 came out in May.
Right. But yeah, it's still sort of a rare thing though that like you have, you know, you have something that like takes place on or over Christmas that isn't really about Christmas.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. Talking more about the story. So Doctor Who tends to do this thing I've noticed where it will have like some supernaturally stuff going on, but like
it actually turns out to not be supernatural.
Yeah, it happens a lot in Doctor Who. And this is, I don't know if this is one of the first examples of it. I don't know how much Old Who did this, but it definitely seems to be a thing with New Who, and this would be the first like New Who example of that.
Right.
And like there was a sort of conflict with Charles Dickens where he was like, you know, thinking like, oh, this is impossible. You know, there's like, you know, ghosts and ghouls and stuff. And of course, like the explanation was that
it's aliens.
It's aliens. But I thought it was weird that he was looking at it from a very scientific perspective, but so was the doctor. And like, for some reason, they were still conflicting on it. Like, because the doctor explained it in like kind of a science-y doctory way, you know, not obviously it was like pseudoscience. It wasn't real science, but he explained it in kind of a science-y way. And yet Dickens was still like hung up on sort of the supernatural side of things. And I didn't quite get that. Like, why did
maybe the Mark Gatiss did it? Just like, well, it's Charles Dickens and ghosts. Ooh, I don't know.
Yeah, like I don't know. It didn't quite work for me. I think it would have made more sense if like, if maybe Dickens was more on the side of, oh, this is ghosts and stuff, and the doctor was more on the side of like, no, this is, you know, this is aliens. But I don't really know enough about Charles Dickens to say like how exactly he would have interpreted it.
I mean, back in the 1800s, ghosts were a lot more people believed in them a lot more than they do today.
Right. Yeah. There was, I mean, you know, we as humans, people call it superstition. I think it's more like we as humans explain things in ways that make sense given our, you know, our level of knowledge. And like at the time, before, you know, when scientific research there was a lot of scientific research happening, but it wasn't like in the wider public knowledge. And like we didn't really have explanations for a lot of the things we see. So we explain them with something that makes sense, like
magic or ghosts.
Yeah, you see a weird apparition, you say, oh, it's a ghost, instead of, some other explanation.
Right. Like, oh, it was the light reflecting upon the glass in a certain way, and there was someone standing over there or something, and it looked like a ghost, blah, 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 something like that.
Right. Yeah. And like, I think, now we have a lot more knowledge of how the universe works, and we can kind of explain a lot of it away. But, there was a time where like, you just didn't have that like well-researched explanation for things. So you explained it how you could.
Right. And also, just how did no one notice the dead lady just sitting there? It was completely obvious. Like her skin was in the theater. Sorry, like her skin was just dark and gray, like of a dead person. Like you can tell the body's decomposed a little bit. It's like, and like she started shining, and the person sitting next to her just acted like nothing was going on.
Yeah, that was a bit hard to believe too. I think there were several moments in this episode where like it was a little harder to suspend your disbelief. And not because there were ghosts and stuff, but just because of like how certain things happened.
Right. And also, why does the Undertaker carry chloroform with him?
Yeah, that was weird too. I guess like maybe it was part of his like process of whatever they did with the bodies back then. I don't know. But yeah, it was kind of odd. And he seemed to like be really casual about using it, which I don't think he would be very experienced with using chloroform on living people.
I understand this problem of the dead rising again for him has been happening, but he's just like, oh, it's like a 90s family sitcom. Oh, you're at it again, aren't you?
Yeah, it was a little bit of an underreaction, I guess, but it was also kind of good for a laugh. I did laugh at that part. Where
that is true. That is true.
Just kind of chill about it. I get it.
And I felt like when the Doctor and Charles Dickens were inside the carriage racing to find Rose, I felt like there should have been some chase music or something. It was very quiet.
It was a strangely quiet scene. I didn't really notice it until you pointed it out, but then once you did, I was like, oh wow, this is a very quiet scene.
Yeah, like sure, it's nice to just hear the sounds going around you, but all you hear is the clattering of the horse's hooves. That's it.
Yeah.
Can we also talk about Rose asking a man in a casket if he's all right?
Rose was kind of useless in this episode, and I feel like that hasn't really been a problem with her so far, but this episode, just like she didn't really, I mean, she had like the conversation with Gwyneth, and that was good. They had like a good conversation, but like when the dead people started to like rise up out of the caskets, she just kind of like yelled for the Doctor to come save her, and like knocked on the door because she couldn't open it for some reason.
Right, like she just became the normal damsel in distress cliche.
Right, yeah. And like that would have been fine if she did like anything else useful for the rest of the episode, but then like all the problems at the end, she kind of could have prevented, but like didn't. Like she was on the side of Gwyneth, like, or of not wanting Gwyneth to, channel these ghosts or these alien creatures into her. And like she was right. We saw how it ended up,
but it was looked over. It was really looked over.
Right. She didn't really like, I don't know. I think she could have fought a little harder and to convince the Doctor like this is a bad idea, but she really didn't. There were some really good character moments in this episode.
Yeah, that was my next note, that there was some sweet moments between Rose and Gwyneth.
Yeah, I really liked their conversations and Gwyneth kind of like looking into Rose's mind and seeing like the whole future and everything. I thought that was cool. I enjoyed some of the interactions between the Doctor and Charles Dickens, especially like when they were in the carriage. And the Doctor was like, "I'm a big fan," and Dickens obviously didn't know what that meant.
What does that mean of keeping yourself cool?
Yeah, I thought that line was maybe a little bit clunky. It was like, wow. I don't know quite why he wouldn't see that as like a figure of speech and would take it really
Right.
literally.
Right.
But whatever. It was like a joke. It doesn't bother me that much. But I really liked the moment where the Gelth were talking about how like they were the last of their kind, destroyed in the Time War, and Rose and the Doctor like looked at each other, and there was
the Doctor had some more guilt come onto her face.
There was so much communicated in like just that look that you couldn't have communicated that in 100 lines of dialogue.
Right.
So that was some great acting in that moment.
And also just, I have a note of like, again, of what you said, the ghosts are actually aliens, Doctor Who in a nutshell.
Yeah. For once, I kind of want them to be like not aliens and actually be ghosts. I mean, I get that like Doctor Who is, it's kind of Scooby-Doo in that way. There's always someone under the mask.
Right.
And I get that. That's like Doctor Who's thing. And later on, Scooby-Doo started to do the thing where they had like real monsters, and
they started that in Zombie Island.
Yeah, and honestly, like once they started doing that, I started to see why they didn't do it before, because it felt weird, right?
Like maybe once or twice, but they started doing it way too much.
Yeah, it felt weird when they started doing it all the time. It didn't really work.
Right. Also, just the Doctor explaining to Rose how time travel works. Just that's not how time travel works. If your future self goes into the past, then your present self no longer has a reason to go into the past. Stuff like that. They explain it in Endgame.
Yeah, which I feel like that might be a conversation they should have had earlier.
Yeah. Like before they went outside.
Yeah, which I think this tends to be a Doctor Who companion thing anyway, where they don't just like sit down with the Doctor and say, okay, what's the deal? Can we talk about what the deal is?
Oh, they do later on. I remember two companions asking that later on.
They always seem to do it very late though. Like they'll do it like later in the season than they really should.
No, the two times I remember, it's like the second or third episode, and it's always the first time they go back into the past together.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
I'll talk about that later in the spoiler section.
Yeah, to me it would be the thing that happens like before I even get into the TARDIS. I'd be like, okay, hold on a minute.
Yeah, well, that's us. That's us.
Yeah,
I totally would do that too.
I'd be like, hold on, I'm not getting in your box until you maybe like explain this whole thing that's happening.
Right.
Strange man.
Mm-hmm. And also the ghosts turned out to be evil. Who knew?
Actually, honestly, I've seen this episode like once, and it's been a couple years. I kind of forgot that was the twist.
Oh, really?
And I guess I wasn't paying very good attention because I kind of didn't see it coming.
Oh, okay.
So it got me, but also like, wasn't super deeply invested at that point because I was like you, I was kind of getting bored.
Right. And they actually broke the Undertaker's neck. The ghosts literally broke his neck on screen.
Yeah, that was a bit intense for a PG show.
Yeah.
I know there are like, maybe things are a little bit different in the UK as far as like what you can and can't show on.
And can or can't say.
Yeah. But Doctor Who doesn't tend to like toe that line that much either. And maybe it's different now that it's very popular in America. But
right.
Yeah, that was definitely surprising for Doctor Who.
Yeah. And can we just talk about how stupid the ghosts are? They just let Charles walk away. Like, not a single one of them went after Charles, and he left the house.
Yeah, he was just like walking about casually, like doing his thing while these ghosts just kind of ignored him, which I guess like maybe they weren't necessarily his focus at them, or he wasn't necessarily their focus at the moment, but
they could have seen the Doctor. Weird. I mean, they could have explained it of like, no, the Doctor's the biggest threat. Go after him.
Which, I don't know, that kind of annoys me too when they like say that aloud in a story.
Yeah.
Because it's usually like not, it's usually not the best strategy.
That's true.
I don't know. It always feels weird when you have the villain in the story say that. It feels like
it's true.
It feels like a thing that they just kind of have to say so you can have your other characters doing what you want them to do. It's a little bit lazy to me.
Yeah, it's like, let him be. He's not going to stop us. And that character actually is the one that stops them.
Right, yeah. It's very overdone, but I don't really know what the better solution would have been here.
Yeah, I can think of a ton of things that do that. There's like anything with a little kid, especially anime with a little kid. He's just a little runt. Don't worry.
Yeah, right.
Especially when it's show and jump.
Yeah, there's a lot of shonen where that's a thing. And then but also you have, the protagonist who's also a kid, and it's like, why are you ignoring that kid but not this kid?
Like, this kid doesn't have any powers, or we live in a civilization where everyone has powers or magic. This kid doesn't have any.
Yeah.
But it then turns out they actually get something. Yeah. Spoilers for My Hero Academia and Black Clover, or any shonen.
That's kind of like, that's not really a spoiler because that's kind of how a lot of shonen go.
Honestly, that's not how Naruto goes. He legit actually know that okay, the first episode, he knows how to do ninjutsu and everything, but he just can't perfect it.
Right.
So it kind of has the formula, kind of doesn't at the same time. And it's not really explored all that much except for the very first episode. Sorry, not Naruto rant. And then when Charles comes back and is explaining his plan, and the ghosts take like 5 minutes until they're like, oh, maybe we should go after him instead. He's like, Doctor, turn off the gas, blah, 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 blah. And the girl's like, oh, no, let's keep chasing the doctor. He's behind this wall. He's behind this gate. Let's keep chasing him. Who cares about that guy over there?
Yeah, it's always like, I don't know. It just seems to be such a thing of ignoring the most useful characters in the story for like no real reason other than like villainous hubris, I guess.
Right. Okay, well, that's all I have for the spoiler-free section. What about you?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's get into spoilers. So
spoiler warning.
Yes, it will be spoilers for. No, it's good. Spoilers for like basically the rest of the show.
Mm-hmm. Like the rest of the seasons to come.
Yeah.
First off, the actress who plays Gwyneth.
Yeah.
Plays a character in Torchwood later.
Okay.
And actually, they refer to that in Journey's End. Tennant and Rose see her, and they're like, hey, that's what's-her-face. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm a descendant of blah, 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 blah.
It's weird that, like, Doctor Who has to kind of explain the fact that there are multiple people with similar-looking faces.
Yep.
Because in real life, that's not really a thing. Like, in real life, you have lots of people who look similar. And like,
there's a dude that works at a grocery store near me that literally looks like you. Except it's like, what if your hair had grown, like, when you had your hair longer?
Yeah.
Like, if he had just let it kept growing longer into like a ponytail. He has the same hairline as you in the front and everything.
It's honestly kind of getting to that point. Because I haven't been able to get a haircut in a while.
Oh, right.
Yeah, this is sort of so this is a thing that the writer for Back to the Future discussed recently. Like, this idea that, like, why didn't anybody recognize Marty McFly? Or why didn't his parents recognize Marty McFly? And the answer, of course, is that they knew him for like a week when they were 17,
right,
and didn't see him again for like,
and it turned out to be their child. They see him born, and they see him grow up. He gradually turns into that.
Right, yeah. Um yeah, and like, of course you wouldn't like recognize
Mm-hmm.
this one kid you knew for a week when you know when
Right.
you were kids. And like I think it's a similar thing with Doctor Who. Like typically these characters that they come across, um they know them for like a day or two, right? And like they don't see them again for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple times where I think it's nice and useful, like with Capaldi. Like I feel like that
Right.
was a nice moment because that was a big defining moment for the Doctor in the Fires of Pompeii.
Yeah, like it had some thematic significance, but I
Mm-hmm.
still think it was a little bit strange that
Mm-hmm.
like because I mean I guess it makes sense for the Doctor to remember
Mm-hmm.
this face because he's pretty good about remembering faces, but
Right.
I don't know. Bob Gale, by the way, was the writer from Back to the Future
Oh,
who
okay.
discussed that.
Okay. But also back to the faces real quick.
Mhm.
Um gosh. What was it? Oh yeah, Martha. Because she was in the two-parter finale in series 2 as well.
Yeah.
She was part of Torchwood. And like later on in series 3 with Martha, like, oh yeah, that was my cousin, blah blah blah.
My cousin who looks exactly like me for some reason.
Right. Couldn't they have actually said twin sister? That would have been more believable. Like it's already cliched, just make it more cliched.
I don't know. I'm just like, why can't we just let there be characters existing in the same universe that have like similar looking faces? That's
And
not a weird thing
they did
in the
that in
real world.
Classic Who. They did that in Classic Who. They just let it be. Because the sixth Doctor, Colin Baker,
Yeah.
he was a character in Peter Davidson's episodes, the fifth Doctor. He was there. He was like I don't know who he was, but he was a soldier or something, but he was there. And then later came back as the Doctor.
Yeah. I
No
don't know.
explanation there.
It's one of those things that like, in real life we don't really question it. We don't question like, why does this person look a lot like my friend? It's like,
Oh, I
well,
do.
do you? Okay. Well, maybe Doctor Who
Not
does
that
it.
intensely, but I always go like, man, I find it fascinating.
It'd be funny if like instead of explaining it, they just like had a one-off line like, "Hey, you look kind of like my friend." And it's like, "Huh, weird."
Okay.
Okay. And then they don't discuss it anymore because like listen, BBC. We know y'all have like 12 actors, all right? We get it. We totally get it. It's fine. You don't have to explain why you can't find any more actors. We understand.
And like Mark Gatiss, he's played at least 2 characters in Doctor Who.
Yeah, like we know that's Mark Gatiss. Don't worry about it.
Right. And they even do that. Except then they tie in the second appearance of Mark Gatiss, or at least the last appearance of Lethbridge Stewart.
Yeah. And to me, like obviously it'd be weird if they brought Billie Piper back in and like she was playing Stephanie, right? Like
Right.
we would be like, no, that's not Stephanie, that's Rose Tyler. But like,
right. I mean, they did that perfectly for the 50th anniversary.
yeah, it was a nice little nod, and like we kind of knew that, like we kind of knew what was happening, but like
Right.
it's definitely would be weirder if it went the other way around, where a character went from a really big role to a really small role. But when they go from a small role to a big role, I don't really think it needs to be explained.
Also, first introduction to the Rift in Cardiff.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's brought back in Boomtown, and then later in Utopia.
Yeah, which is interesting that like there's a rift
and
is a big thing, and
that's the base of Jack Harkness's Torchwood.
Yeah. It's interesting that a rift is a big thing in this season, and also in season 5, it becomes a big thing again.
Yeah, like the whole crack in time and space.
Yeah, I guess they were like sort of different, but you still had like things coming out of this rift that
right. You know,
forces.
I actually had that in my notes. Like, is it like the crack or even like the void?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would assume there's like some similar things at play there, but like, you know, obviously in season 5 it was a bigger thing because it was almost the end of the entire universe. It was the main
focal point.
Right. Whereas here it's more of like it's part of the greater story, but it's not like the main part. Which, I mean, with a show like this, you're going to end up reusing ideas.
Right.
Over time.
Right. I get it.
Yeah.
Also, first time Bad Wolf is mentioned.
Yes. Which, yeah, the Old Who didn't really have those season-long connections, did it?
The which one?
Like, Old Who, it didn't really have, like, plots that kind of went across seasons.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, there's little bits of it here. It's definitely not as much as we see, like, in later episodes and later seasons, but, yeah, they're definitely, like, setting up bigger things.
And that's what really got me into Doctor Who to begin with, was these overarching stories, because I never saw that in the other shows I watched. Like, just other shows, it was like, you know, like Fairly Odd Parents or Phineas and Ferb. They were nice, small stories. Some of them kind of connected, and like they would briefly mention something, but it wasn't like a huge overarching story.
Right. They were episodic. They kind of like, for the most part, you know, the status quo of the world is going to be the same with each new episode.
Right. And that's what really originally got me into Doctor Who, because that was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that.
Yeah, it wasn't a big thing at this time. Like, it's definitely a big thing now. In fact, most drama shows that you see now are that way. And a lot of, like, you know, science fiction and fantasy shows are that way. Yeah, when this was coming out, it wasn't. There weren't a lot of shows that were like that.
Right. And also, Gwyneth mentions Rose thinking about her dad a lot more.
Yeah, that was a hint of things to come. I thought that was interesting.
And like in Father's Day, the doctor's like, "Did you plan this?" And she's like, "No, I didn't plan this." I'm like, "Yeah, you totally did."
Yeah, I don't know that she like planned it, but I think probably it was sort of maybe in the back of her mind, maybe even a subconscious thing.
Right, because even mentioned in the episode Father's Day, she wasn't interested in traveling with the doctor until he mentioned it was a time machine.
Yeah. So maybe, like, I don't know, maybe something like sparked in her mind where she was like, oh, maybe I could. But like, she wasn't seriously thinking about it until maybe later on.
But what we were talking about earlier in the non-spoiler section about companions asking what should I do to not have implications on to the future, like, it's both mentioned with Martha's first episode traveling back in time with the doctor to the globe with Shakespeare, and then Thin Ice with Bill. They both implemented the butterfly effect. Like, what if I step on a butterfly and I cease to exist?
Don't step on any butterflies. Yeah.
I love Capaldi's reaction to that. Well, surely, I mean, that's what's happened with Pete. Who's Pete? Pete! He was standing right here, and he stepped on a butterfly, and now you don't even remember him. And, like, she legitimately was like, really?
I do kind of enjoy that Doctor Who kind of plays a little fast and loose with his time travel. There are definitely moments where I do wish there was a little more consistency, especially when it becomes like the solution to a big problem.
Right.
And I think,
like in Spyfall Part 2, the doctor's like, "Oh yeah, I just went back in time and fixed it. No big deal."
Yeah, I feel like Moffat was bad for it at times, and Chibnall definitely seems bad for it. it wasn't. There wasn't as much of it earlier on in the show,
right?
Until things obviously started getting a little more wibbly wobbly later. But
yeah, especially with 11.
Yeah,
it really started with 11.
It's kind of nice though at this point in the show where they're not really doing it much. It's a little bit refreshing.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I guess my point with that discussion was less like wanting an explanation for time travel and more like just wanting to know the whole deal with the Doctor, because they never really seem to discuss the Doctor until like way later than they should. It's like, okay, who are you? What's this weird box? Like, why are you here? Where are we going?
Right.
That would be like what I would be saying before I even got in the TARDIS.
And actually, that was kind of nicely explained with Amy, in my opinion. She had met the Doctor multiple times throughout her life.
Yeah.
Once when she was a little girl, and then again, 10 years later, and then again 2 years later.
And I guess too, I guess you could say that like, the companions have like this really kind of wild, amazing, incredible, scary day, and the Doctor is the one person who kind of is showing any stability in those moments, and like they don't really even question it until kind of the thrill wears off.
Right.
And like reality sets in, like, oh, this is a wild thing that happened. Why am I not asking questions?
Like with Martha, that was a big implication with Martha.
Yeah. So I guess it kind of makes sense in that, if you look at it that way.
Well, that's all the notes I have. I don't know about you.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've got.
Well, again, it was, I really liked the ending. I appreciated the ending. Like the Gwyneth sacrificing herself, even though she was already dead, whatever. And
okay, this is a thing I thought in that moment, but what's the deal with women catching themselves on fire for the Doctor? This is 2 episodes in a row that this has happened.
It happened with Jabe.
It happened with Jabe and again with Gwyneth, and it's probably going to happen again. I'm going to
definitely.
I'm going to keep a counter of women setting themselves on fire for the Doctor. Like it's, we'll just count it as we go. I think.
Okay, everyone. Well, that's all we have for today. Next time will be episode 4 of series 1, Aliens in London.
See you then.